Hello, everybody, and welcome to CIT 245 Game Design on Paper. This week we'll be discussing rules and balancing. The first thing we want to talk about is developing fair rules. You want your rules to be clear and concise and be able to be understood by everyone involved, and you want everyone to feel like they have a fair shot at winning or completing the game. There are four major topics that we want to talk about for developing fair rules. We want to talk about clarity, consistency, accessibility, and balance. Clarity is making sure that your rules are straightforward, unambiguous, easy to understand, and easy to implement. Consistency. We talk about consistency. We want to make sure the rules don't change in the middle of the game for no reason. You can have rules change ups that fit the theme of your game, but they need to be spelled out before players start playing so that they know to expect it and not to be surprised by it. If you're designing a tabletop RPG like Dungeons and Dragons, and you as the dungeon master are all of a sudden going to change the way that the the characters interact with magic in your world, you drop that on players in the beginning of a session, they're not going to be very happy with that because they've come to expect that the rules of the game are going to stay the way that they are. Similarly, if you're playing a game like Uno, you want Uno has a set of rules that are actually developed by the creators, but there are a lot of house rules that end up coming into a game of Uno. So you want to make sure before you start playing that everyone knows which house rules you're using and what changes to the rules they can expect. The next part we want to talk about is accessibility. We want to make sure that no matter what skill level a player has in their game, whether they're brand new or they've been playing for years, that they are able to understand and access the rules and play the game without any interruption. Complex rules can create strategy and interesting interactions, but for if a new player is faced with a bunch of intricate rules that they have a hard time understanding, they will shy away from playing your game. An example, I guess, would be when a new player starts playing Magic the Gathering. A lot of the starter products and things that they create to make the game easier for new players omit a lot of the more technical rules and introduce those at a later point, so that players can ease into the basics of playing the game at the start. The last thing we want to talk about is balance. Rules should be fair for everyone, and everyone should have access to the same resources. But at the same time, you want to make sure that you're developing a game in a way that is not promoting a single strategy or a single method of winning the game that is better than all of the others. If that imbalance occurs, then players will lean towards doing the best, most efficient thing, and players who are not doing that thing will not have a great chance of winning the game. All right, so how do rules influence gameplay? Your rules will set up a structure for the way that players interact with the game, whether that be through player decision, such as rules telling the players what they can do during their turn, or rules that help or hinder certain strategies. It also affects the flow of the game, the dynamics in the game, the pace of the game, what happens during a turn, how many turns there are in a game, how long the game plays. And then also there's player interaction. Your rules will set about how players interact with each other in the game. As we discussed last week, player interaction is a very important component of multiplayer paper games. Your rules will set about how those players interact with each other during the course of the game, whether it's cooperating, competing with each other, directly attacking other players, and things like that. How the politics will work out in the game. Now let's talk balancing gameplay. Um, there are a couple of things that you want to make sure, a little bit of math to be done when designing how gameplay is played out. Um, in resource management, you want to make sure resources are distributed fairly. You want to make sure that there's not an overwhelming uh, advantage of being a being a single kind of player, or uh, a role in a game. Because if those roles have access to too many resources, then it becomes unfair for other players to be able to catch up. The next thing is action economy. When I talk action economy, I speak of the number of things that somebody can do during a turn, what those things end up translating to in terms of resources or effect on the game. Balancing the cost and the effect of those actions can determine which ones players will gravitate towards during gameplay. Um, it can also form strategy in the game. You don't want players to be taking the same action every turn. You don't want those actions to have imbalanced benefits one way or the other for players. And finally, there's victory conditions. This is as I mentioned before, with balance, you want to make sure that players have as equal of a chance as possible to win a game, and that includes achieving different victory conditions. If you think about, I guess another good example, or a good example of this is, again, Magic the Gathering, or any trading card game, really, where you can win the game by defeating your opponent, by attacking them, reducing their life to zero. Magic has other alternate win conditions, such as poison, where if they get 10 poison counters, they lose the game. Games can also end if players run out of cards in their deck and can't draw any more cards. All of these strategies are at different points in the history of Magic equally viable and can be made viable by player interaction. So it's just as achievable to create a deck that gets rid of your opponent's deck and makes them lose by losing the cards in their deck, as it is to make a deck that can beat somebody by depleting their life points. Now we consider player experience. When designing rules, we want to make sure, again, that players are of all skill levels are able to play the game. And when we design rules and more complex rules, we want to make sure that those rules are implemented in a way that is not unfair to somebody to a new player. So first we'll talk skill ceiling. So skill ceiling is the absolute highest complexity for strategic depth in a game. Games with high skill ceilings reward experienced players and talented players who are able to capitalize on strategy within the game. This can a high skill ceiling game, something like chess, the ways that you can win the game, the ways that you can interact with the game change exponentially and increase exponentially the higher your skill level at the game. Next is skill floor. A low skill floor means that your game is more accessible to new players. the simpler your rules, the clearer and I guess more gradual the learning curve is. It allows new players to get into it easier, and also gives them a better chance of winning the game. If you think about another, I guess Uno is a good example of this, where the basics of Uno are, play a card of the same color or the same number. That takes very little skill to understand of how to effectively do that, and you are uh, pretty easily going to be able, as a new player, understand that you have to hit zero cards in your hand before everyone else. Those two rules make up the beginning player experience of the game. It's very easy on ramp to getting people into playing the game and learning more about it. The next thing that we want to talk about is theme and how that can be integrated into your rules and gameplay. You want to make sure that the themes that you're using and the rules mesh well together. If a rule or a gameplay mechanic doesn't make sense thematically, it can take people out of the immersion of the game and cause them to have less fun. So when designing rules and mechanics in your game, you want to make sure that those rules also fit thematically. You don't want rules that are there only for a technical reason and not something that would make sense in the setting that you're setting your game in. What we want to talk about is achieving strategic depth in your rules and your balance to create that high skill ceiling while not raising the skill floor. A couple ways that you can go about this. First one is decision points, which is points at which players make decisions that affect gameplay. This provides additional strategic options. So if you're playing a game where you have, I talk about that action economy, multiple different actions that you can take, but you have to select one of them. That can create a strategy around those decision points. The next one, we want to talk about strategic interactions, interactions where players can influence game's outcome by interacting with the game mechanics. Whether that's in a game like, I'll use Betrayal House on the Hill. In a game like Betrayal, which is shown to the image in the slide, interactions with the board directly affect the result of the end game. The more of the board that you explore, the more of in the game you would find omen cards that will affect which scenario you are in the game, or you are acting out in the game. And the more that changes, the entire outcome of how to win the game can change as well. Next is your variable setup. Again, I'll use Betrayal. Variable setup means when you are creating the game space, the game board, it varies from game to game. So you're not always playing out the same steps during a game. Things change fundamentally between between playing the game multiple times. So in Betrayal, the shape of the board actually changes every time you play by revealing tile cards that you use to create floor tiles that create the map that you're playing on. Finally, is the way we go back to resource management. Resource management can be used to create strategic depth in a plethora of ways, whether it's by creating a strategy that can give you more resources than your opponents, whether it's a strategy that allows you to use resources more effectively than your opponents, or whether it's a decision tree that results in those resources becoming either easier to obtain or harder to obtain for a number of players in the game. And that's our discussion for today. I have added some additional resources here so that you can take a look at kind of what I mean in different parts of this discussion. In the Dungeons and Dragons Player's Handbook, specifically the fifth edition Player's Handbook, Chapter 1, Step by Step Characters. It explains how to create a character for D&D from the beginning all the way to the end, so till you have a complete character sheet. This is a good way to explain the expectations of rules and mechanics and how they interact with a player for the first time. Um, Another good example of onboarding and explaining rules concisely for new players. This video, How to Play Betrayal at House on the Hill by Team Hypercube on YouTube. The link will be in the slide PDF that I'll post in the course space. But if you want to search Team Hypercube on YouTube and check out their How to Play Betrayal at House on the Hill. Betrayal at House on the Hill can be a very complex game, and they explain the rules pretty concisely in under 5 minutes. So you want to shoot for when you're designing a paper game, to be able to teach the rules to somebody within that like 5 minute span. And the better that you can do that, the easier it will be to introduce new players to your game. And that'll be it for today's lecture. Next week, we'll be going into the game design process and iterative design and what that means when you're creating a game and going through the different steps from concept to completion. See you guys later.